You know, I've been around for a while. I've met some interesting people. Done some crazy things. You'd think that there wasn't much that could take me by surprise. You'd be wrong. The world is full of stories and science and things that amaze and confound me every single day. Incredible mysteries that keep me awake at night. Some I can answer, and others just defy logic.
Does the human body contain mysteries beyond the realm of medical science? In a California hospital, dozens fall mysteriously ill after coming in contact with it.
Real fear set in when we realized we didn't know what it was.
Did she become a living chemical weapon? In New York, a man is struck by lightning. He turns into a musical genius.
Something happened in his brain, and he developed this incredible passion to play the piano.
Can our brains be rewired? And in Tennessee, a young man cries tears of blood.
I thought maybe I was going to pass away because I thought I was going to bleed out.
But no one knows why.
Yeah, it's a weird world. I love it. The human body. If you're like me, you probably take for granted that we walk around inside one of the most sophisticated, complex organisms in existence. You probably think you know a lot about it, but here's some stuff I bet you didn't know. There are 250,000 sweat glands in each of your feet, producing over 1 liter of sweat every day. No wonder they stink. Earwax is necessary for healthy ears. Your tongue is the strongest muscle in your body. Throughout your life, you will produce enough saliva to fill a typical backyard pool. A full bladder is about the size of a softball. And finally, most men have regular erections while they sleep. Not now, okay? It's amazing, isn't it? But how do they know this stuff? Is there anything modern medicine can't accomplish? Well, I can tell you, there is one thing. They can't explain the incredible story of Gloria Ramirez.
February 19th, 1994. Respiratory therapist Maureen Welch is working nights at a hospital outside Los Angeles.
I remember being on my shift, working in the neonatal intensive care unit, not having a lot of patients, and covering the emergency room.
But the calm ends when a desperately ill patient is brought into the ER.
We received a call that we're receiving a 20-something woman coming in for respiratory distress.
31-year-old Gloria Ramirez is suffering from advanced cancer. She is fighting for her life.
She was in profound distress. Her condition was not looking well. Her color was poor. Her oxygen exchange was poor. Her ability to even speak in a sentence was remiss. It wasn't available.
But there's something else about Gloria that troubles Maureen.
There was an oily sheen on her body, kind of a garlicky smell. It wasn't overt. It was very mild. It would be almost something you'd miss if you weren't looking for it.
That's not all. When a routine blood sample is taken, Maureen is stunned to see Gloria's blood is full of strange crystals. It also has a weird odor.
I said, does anybody smell that? What are you talking about? The blood, don't you smell it?
Somehow, Gloria's blood reeks of the hazardous chemical, ammonia.
We had a shiny body, we had smelly blood, we had crystals in the blood.
Despite the puzzling symptoms, the medical staff battled to save Gloria's life.
Her condition began to deteriorate. All the medical professionals were getting in position for this severe situation.
Suddenly, Nurse Susan King is overcome with nausea.
She picked up the syringe and then she collapsed.
Before Maureen can react, she also blacks out.
And the next time I woke up, I was incapacitated. IVs in my arm, and I was on a gurney with medical issues that I didn't know how I had gotten them. All I knew was that I was sick and I didn't know if I was going to survive or not at that time.
More of Gloria's trauma team succumb. The exact cause is a mystery, but one thing seems certain. Whatever it is, it's coming from Gloria.
That was when real fear set in, when we realized what we had, but didn't know what it was. When it was first aired, they said they thought it was organophosphate poisoning. And that sounded good, you know. After the fact, organophosphate would have been fine because they knew how to treat organic phosphate poisoning. And some of us were treated for it, which made us even sicker.
Panic erupts in the ER, and the department is evacuated.
There were ambulances and fire trucks and paramedics and all kinds of people around us.
A skeleton medical crew bravely remains to work on Gloria. But soon after, she tragically dies. Whatever is loose in the ER is spreading. 23 of the 37 ER staff have bizarre and frightening symptoms that require medical attention.
I was admitted to a hospital. I was there for a week. I had several apneic events, according to my husband, and I did not respond to him. And during that time, I had memory loss and aphasia. I was not able to speak well. My language had been, in some way, deranged.
Maureen's colleague, Dr. Julie Gorczynski, is worst affected. She contracts hepatitis, pancreatitis, and avascular necrosis, a disease that literally kills the bones of her legs. Gorczynski spends weeks in intensive care.
The reality is that no one knew what was going on.
A hazardous materials team is sent into Gloria's trauma room.
You know, they investigated every drain, took every air sample, bagged the body so that no one else would be exposed. And in the days to follow, there was going to be a toxic, very high-profile autopsy.
But the autopsy fails to find a plausible explanation. To this day, the Gloria Ramirez outbreak remains a mystery. Maureen Welch recovers, but her life is never the same.
It took me 6 to 8 months to get back where I was before it happened. But I still have some of those moments with speech that don't allow me to express myself the way I once did.
What caused 22 experienced ER staff to fall ill? Was Gloria Ramirez's blood toxic? Psychologist Dr. Melissa Sexton doubts it. Why? Not everyone who treated Gloria got sick.
Why didn't the paramedics who are attending her also experience the same symptoms?
Dr. Sexton is convinced the answer is an illness not of the body, but of the mind. A condition known as conversion disorder. It makes people ill purely through the power of suggestion.
Conversion disorder is a set of symptoms that are not explained by any organic cause. Increased heart palpitation, fainting, nausea, vomiting, headaches, paralysis, or numbness, or loss of speech or hearing. And traditionally that's been the case that young females are more susceptible to experiencing conversion disorder type symptoms. It is a lot like mass hysteria. But they won't be feigning those symptoms, they'll be real, but there'll be no cause biologically or neurologically even.
The disorder's frightening symptoms arise from a surprising source, the power of suggestion.
And if they see other people develop symptoms such as rashes or headaches or nausea, then that might trigger a response that mimics those symptoms, and so it spreads, it becomes contagious in that kind of way. Much like a yawn. If I were to yawn and you yawn.
In Dr. Sexton's view, it makes sense the disorder would take hold in the trauma unit.
If you've ever worked in an emergency room, you know that you have to operate on adrenaline a lot of times. Everything's heightened, and if there's an unexplained noxious odor and someone faints because of the odor, it seemed like it was a ripe situation for conversion disorder to occur. I'm not saying that every person that experienced symptoms should be diagnosed with conversion disorder. There could be a real causation to the symptoms, but I am saying that it is likely that other people, other bystanders witnessing this whole event, and I don't mean the death of Gloria Ramirez alone, but the whole event that surrounded her death. It's likely that there were people that suffer from conversion disorder.
Did the ER staff succumb to a case of mass hysteria? Can people be sickened by a toxin that's only in their mind? Or was it something else?
It has been used in the past as a chemical warfare agent.
ER staff at a California hospital fall gravely ill after treating a patient. Did Gloria Ramirez have toxic blood? Biochemist Michael Shaw thinks the incident was caused by something extraordinary.
I believe what happened to the people in the ER was they were exposed to a toxic compound. It has been used in the past as a chemical warfare agent.
Specifically, a highly toxic nerve gas known as dimethyl sulfate.
The symptoms experienced by the people in the ER very closely mirror the textbook symptoms that are listed for dimethyl sulfate. Tearing of eyes, respiratory symptoms, difficulty in breathing, convulsions, loss of muscular control, and at high enough exposure, death.
The gas is so toxic, even minute quantities are lethal.
Dimethyl sulfate carries what's called IDLH, or immediate danger to life and health, of 7 parts per million, which is not a very high concentration. It has been suggested that perhaps twice that level could kill somebody pretty quickly. So, looking backward, the fact that there were non-lethal consequences meant it was a much smaller exposure.
How did a deadly nerve gas get into a hospital ER? Remarkably, for once, it has nothing to do with the CIA plot.
Dimethyl sulfate that was actually produced in the body of the patient, Gloria Ramirez, hence the name, the toxic lady.
Now, just wait a second here. What did he say again?
Dimethyl sulfate that was actually produced in the body of the patient, Gloria Ramirez.
Right, that's what I thought he said. Now, this story is getting too weird. Or what? This guy is trying to tell us that Gloria had somehow become a chemical warfare factory? How the heck does a human body produce a lethal toxic gas? I can't imagine how that's possible.
Shaw says the answer lies inside Gloria herself.
The evidence came from a lot of work that was done at Lawrence Livermore Labs. They found metabolites in her body that could produce the dimethyl sulfate toxic compound.
Can a human body create its own lethal nerve gas? How? The key is a home remedy Gloria was using. It's called DMSO.
Gloria Ramirez was using DMSO in very large amounts. Dimethyl sulfoxide, DMSO, is primarily used as a solvent in chemical manufacturing. Back some years ago, largely based on the work of a Dr. Stanley Jacob, they discovered that there were certain medicinal properties for this compound, based on the rather unusual property that it penetrates skin. There are very few chemicals that penetrate skin, especially to the extent of DMSO. In fact, you can rub it on your skin and within a couple of minutes, taste it in your mouth. So it's very quickly absorbed. It was discovered that if you rub it on parts of your body that ache, it's fairly effective as an analgesic. And there was a lot of work being done on this compound until a story came out of some woman in Ireland that had a sprained wrist, who was rubbing it on her wrist and then apparently died, supposedly as a result of some allergic reaction to this compound. Suddenly, the FDA canceled all the work they were doing on it, and Dr. Jacob was later to observe that they seldom show such interest in a single death in a clinical study. DMSO has been used for many years as a topical medication rubbed on the area of the body to relieve pain in such things as arthritis.
Gloria needed DMSO to help her cope with cancer.
It is said that people that use a lot of it end up smelling like garlic, and not in a good way. The natural metabolic product in the body of anybody using DMSO rubbing on themselves is dimethyl sulfone.
On its own, dimethyl sulfone in Gloria's bloodstream was harmless, but it underwent another, more dangerous transformation.
There are many strange things that can happen in a human body in an ER. There was a lot of oxygen used. There was electricity used for a defibrillation of the patient. So now you're catalyzing a very unlikely chemical reaction to the toxic compound dimethyl sulfate.
Shaw's convinced it was this combination that turned innocent muscle rub into deadly nerve gas.
In the act of withdrawing the blood, there seemed to be enough dimethyl sulfate vapor coming off this blood sample to produce these effects. Fortunately, not enough present to kill the people, but enough present to get them sick.
Did Gloria's blood produce a deadly toxin? Was it the product of bizarre medical fluke? Or were there other, even stranger chemicals in the ER that day? Susan Goldsmith is an investigative journalist.
The paramedics that took Gloria Ramirez to the hospital gave her an IV, and nobody became ill in that ambulance. And so the theory that somehow she was fuming, she was toxic, doesn't hold up when you actually look at the evidence. The county's ultimate theory on what happened was that mass hysteria had taken hold in this emergency room. And one of the sources in my story said these are people who are used to accident victims and ATV victims and people being brought in very bad condition, and they are not prone to mass hysteria.
She believes the explanation has nothing to do with nerve gas.
There was a theory forwarded by a couple of scientists with Lawrence Livermore Lab that a medication Gloria Ramirez was taking for her cervical cancer interacted with some oxygen in the ER that night and created this toxic environment. I spoke with the world's leading expert on that medication for my story, who told me the theory simply wasn't credible. There was no known history of that drug ever doing anything of the sort, and he said that the research was never published because it simply wasn't a credible theory. The symptoms that the people in the emergency room experienced that night, many of them were totally consistent with being exposed to meth chemicals. The chemicals that are used in the manufacturing of meth are highly toxic. Somebody had a meth lab inside that hospital, and they were using the IV bags to transport the chemicals, and one of them ended up in the emergency room that night.
A secret meth lab in an urban California hospital. It's not as unlikely as it sounds, according to Goldsmith. At the time, the area was the meth capital of the world.
Meth labs had been found in a preschool or a daycare center and in a lot of other places throughout the county. A hospital is a very logical place for meth chemicals to be manufactured because there's a lot of chemicals around, there's a lot of smells, people know how to deal with different kinds of chemicals.
Goldsmith's theory even explains Gloria's strange odor.
The fumes and smells associated with meth labs are ammonia-like odors and sewer-like odors. And there had been several reports at this hospital prior to the Gloria Ramirez incident of patients becoming sick and reporting ammonia-like odors and sewer-like odors.
But how did Gloria come into contact with the chemicals? Goldsmith thinks one of the IV bags being used to smuggle them was hooked up to Gloria by accident.
So they put in an IV bag and someone smelled ammonia-like fumes, and very quickly people became quite ill and the ER was evacuated.
But if this was the cause of the trauma team's collapse, why didn't anything turn up in the investigation?
The record showed that they disposed of all of Gloria Ramirez's blood. Gloria Ramirez's autopsy was unprecedented. They had workers going in spacesuits with special oxygen being delivered to them via umbilical cords. They had constructed a special chamber inside the coroner's office for the autopsy. People monitored the autopsy via video monitor, and they had hazmat and fire crews standing by right outside. Hospital officials were facing a lot of liability. Maybe meth lab operators made sure that all the evidence went away.
Was the Ramirez incident a case of mass hysteria? Did Gloria's blood generate a deadly nerve gas? Or were the ER staff felled by chemicals from a secret meth lab? Whatever the truth, the diagnosis is definitely weird Or what? In New York, a man struck by lightning turns into a musical genius.
A near-death experience profoundly changes the individual afterward.
Moonlight Sonata. This famous piece by Beethoven was dedicated to the student he fell in love with. Beautiful, isn't it? You know, I adore classical music and I just love the piano. Pity I can't play it. Yeah, I know I should have kept up my lessons. Now it's too late because to master an instrument like this takes a lifetime, right? Wrong. You can do it in a flash.
Albany, New York, August 1994. Orthopedic surgeon Tony Sicori is on the phone to his mother when the weather takes an ominous turn for the worse. What happens next will become one of the most baffling stories in medical history. Ingrid Wickelgren is an editor of Scientific American Mind.
He was just about to hang up the phone when some clouds came in. Suddenly he heard this loud crack. He saw a flash. The bolt of lightning hit Dr. Sikoria in the face. He was blown backward about 15 feet or so, and he apparently went into cardiac arrest.
Tony is clinically dead, but his mind is very much alive.
He saw his own body near him, but apart from him, and he thought, oh, I guess I'm dead. He wasn't upset that he was dead. Instead, he sort of felt at peace. And he reports that he sort of felt like he was jumping for joy at kind of being, on the other side. And he had some further apparitions, I guess, of floating up the stairs and seeing his children in their room playing and thinking, oh yeah, they'll be fine. And then floating out of the building and being surrounded by this bluish white light. And it was all very peaceful and happy at this time.
In an out-of-body experience, Tony watches a passerby rush to his aid.
The body landed right next to a woman who happened to be a nurse who was waiting to use the phone. That nurse immediately began performing CPR on him.
Miraculously, she brings Tony back to life.
Lightning strikes can be deadly, so it's not unreasonable to think he might have died without her assistance.
Although technically dead just minutes earlier, Tony now feels fine. He even declines all further help.
Well, he refused to go to the hospital. It's not totally clear to me why. I think maybe he figured, well, you're hit with lightning, you're either dead or you're alive. He happened to be alive. Or maybe he just didn't want to go to the emergency room. He'd been through enough.
Amazingly, it appears Tony has suffered no ill effects from the lightning strike. And for a time, his life seems to return to normal.
He saw his cardiologist when he went home, and his heart actually checked out fine.
But soon after, Tony becomes aware of a peculiar change within.
Dr. Sikoria developed an incredible passion for music. Instead of the old rock that he preferred, he suddenly needed to hear piano music, classical piano music.
A former football player, Tony has never listened to classical music before in his life. Now, his head is filled with it.
He ran out to the store and bought CDs. And he bought this one CD of this pianist playing Chopin, and he played it on his way to work, on his way home from work, and then over and over and over again.
Soon, just listening to music isn't enough. Tony has an overpowering desire to play it. He borrows a friend's piano.
So we bought the sheet music for every piece on that CD, and he starts practicing.
Learning the piano becomes an obsession.
And he practices 4 to 6 hours a day. He gets up in the morning at 4 o'clock and plays for a couple hours. He gets home, the kids go to bed, he plays. Again, he practices by himself. The adult brain does not learn these complex musical skills very well, and he was 42 at the time. Remarkably, Dr. Sikoria became an extremely skilled piano player. He plays with great emotion, and that reflects the fact that, you know, he's developed this passion for the music.
Tony's obsession then takes another turn. Not only can he play music, he discovers he can write it.
He had a dream in which he was playing a piece. And when he woke up, the piece was still in his mind, and he realized this piece had never been played before. This is his own music. He decided he was going to write it down and compose that piece of music that came to him in his dream.
From having no musical skills at all, Tony is now creating entire symphonies, almost at will. Then, just a few years after his accident, Tony is given the chance to perform in public.
In 2002, Dr. Sikoria debuted his newfound interest in piano in front of an audience. He must have been really nervous, but excited, and he played with great emotion. It got great reviews.
It's an achievement that still mystifies both scientists and music critics alike.
Becoming a professional pianist is incredibly difficult. The idea that people would come and listen to someone who, by all rights, should be an amateur is remarkable.
You know, this story is truly amazing, even miraculous. One day, you're just a normal guy, and then, boom, everything changes. Where did Tony's extraordinary talent suddenly come from? Surely the lightning had something to do with it. In fact, many survivors of lightning strikes claim remarkable changes in their lives occur after the event. I want to see if they're right. Now, don't try this at home. Funny, except for a need to lift my leg, I don't feel any different.
Where did Tony Sikoria's extraordinary talent come from? Can lightning turn someone into a musical genius? Phyllis Atwater has been researching near-death experiences for over 30 years. She thinks Sikoria's newfound musical talent was triggered by his brush with death.
A near-death experience is an intense awareness, sense, or experience of otherworldliness that happens at the edge of death that profoundly changes the individual afterward.
But how can Atwater be so sure? First-hand experience.
I died 3 times in 1977 in 3 months. Death number 1 was January the 2nd. It was extreme hemorrhaging and a miscarriage. Death number 2 was 2 days later. Major thrombosis in the right thigh vein, which dislodged, followed by the worst case of phlebitis the specialist had ever heard of, let alone seen. 3 months later, they're not really sure what killed me. They thought maybe it might have been heart attacks. I reached this realm where we in research call the realm of all-knowing, where all of the puzzle pieces of life are revealed, all of your questions are answered. Let me just say that, yes, it changed my life.
Atwater believes these changes are not just psychological.
Near-death experiences are very powerful, so powerful that they tend to change the individual in specific ways. Often your personality will alter or differ. The way you speak will change. There are physiological changes in the body afterward. We don't hear much about those. We hear about the psychological ones, that you don't fear death anymore, that you can come back more service-oriented, more loving, more caring. We don't hear about the physiological ones, and those are profound. It changes the body clock with most people, changes brain dominance with most people, changes brain structure and function with most people. There's a pattern of changes in the nervous system, the digestive system, and skin sensitivity.
Did a lightning strike turn Tony Sikoria into a musical virtuoso?
it opens up the creative doors. You are inspired, and you want to create things, you want to do things. It's almost as if you are suddenly kissed by the muses. All that creativity that is existent within all of us suddenly bubbles up. And you want to express it, you want to share it, and many times it can become obsessive.
Did Tony Sikoria become a modern-day Mozart thanks to a near-death experience? Was his mind altered in ways beyond our comprehension? Or did something even more remarkable happen?
Things make a lot of sense when you believe in reincarnation.
A bolt of lightning turns a man into a musical genius. Does a near-death experience account for his talent? Spiritualist Dr. Susan Shumsky doesn't see it that way.
There's no such thing as having a talent given to you out of the blue.
Shumsky believes Tony's newfound skills came from his very distant past.
You know, there's a lot of things that make a lot of sense when you believe in reincarnation. Tony had a dream that he described. Him on stage playing his own musical composition as a pianist. That was not a dream. That was a past life memory.
How was Tony able to recall a memory from a previous life?
We develop many skills through lifetime after lifetime after lifetime as we reincarnate. The mind stores all of our memories, not only from this life, but from all previous lifetimes. And we can tap into that storehouse and we can develop talents and abilities that we have developed in past lives.
Shumsky's convinced the lightning strike allowed Tony's brain to access more than just memories, but past life skills as well.
Tony was a composer and a musician in his past lives. When Tony had his bolt of lightning, I believe that this lit up parts of his brain. This awakened something in himself that he already had. His natural ability started to come out. The skills of music, composition, playing a piano, that he had been that in a past life.
Shumsky says the bolt out of the blue steered Tony towards his true destiny.
Tony says that he's a different person, but I believe that now Tony is more himself than he's ever been.
Do we all have former lives very different from our own? And can we harness past life skills and use them in the present? Neuroscientist Dr. Brent Harris agrees something profound happened to Tony Sikoria, but he doesn't think it had anything to do with reincarnation.
When the brain gets shocked by a lightning strike, it's impossible to know exactly what's going to happen because it can have a severe effect that causes massive damage to the brain, or it can be actually fairly mild and cause no noticeable damage.
However, in Tony's case, Dr. Harris believes the lightning literally rewired his brain.
An incident like this is 1 in a million. It's possible that the lightning strike that affected Dr. Sikoria's brain altered his frontal lobe neurocircuitry, releasing him to follow a newfound talent in music.
How is this possible? And why music?
The frontal lobe helps to control creativity and our ability to make decisions about, whether we want to be creative or not. And so when changes happen in the frontal lobe, we become less inhibited. The neural circuitry may have become changed to reawaken innate ability in him, or an ability that developed during childhood that had been somewhat repressed for most of his life. I believe as a neuroscientist that we certainly have developmental periods where we are changing the circuitry within our brain, making it stronger, making it weaker, based on what we're doing. And that's why during early childhood development, it's so important to expose kids to music, to reading, to physical activity, so that their brain development parallels their body development.
But if Tony's brain was rewired, why didn't his new musical abilities begin immediately?
I think that probably relates to some recovery time after the lightning strike, and the intense training that he started doing again immediately during that time period to re-energize those specific areas of the brain that were important in music.
Did Tony's brain get rewired by a lightning bolt? Do near-death experiences alter the way we think and act? Or can skills from our past lives be transferred to the present? Whatever the answer, Tony's story is weird. Or what? In Tennessee, a teen cries tears of blood.
This is a warning from God.
The Virgin Mary. Beautiful, isn't she? You know, throughout history, religious iconography has been one of the most powerful influences on mankind. Everywhere, symbols of our faith are represented in statues, paintings, architecture, nearly everything. But there's another side to these objects, one that has baffled both scientists and the church alike. Over the last century, a new phenomenon has begun to manifest itself. A series of statues has been discovered that seem to bleed. A sign which many say is a message from a greater power. Is it possible? Most are easily discounted as hoaxes, but now there's a new debate raging. Why? Because it's happened again. But this time, it's not a statue. It's a human.
Rockwood, Tennessee, 2009. Like many other boys his age, 15-year-old Calvino Ingram is enjoying life at junior high school. But one morning in early May, Calvino's life takes a bizarre and frightening turn.
I was getting out of the shower and I was wiping the mirror because I was about to dry off. And I looked into the mirror and I seen my eyes were bleeding and I freaked out. It was streaming down my face and running down my cheek.
Calvino has no other symptoms and has never had a problem with his eyes.
Some of everything went through my mind when I first seen that. I got nervous, I got scared. I thought maybe I was going to pass away because I thought I was going to bleed out.
Horrified, he rushes downstairs to his mother, Tammy.
I said, "What'd you do? You scratch yourself?" I'm not knowing exactly what he's talking about. So by the time I get up close to him, I'm seeing that the blood is coming down both eyes. So I panic. He's scared. I'm terrified.
She races him to the hospital. But by the time they get to the ER, the bleeding is stopped.
When I got to the hospital, they pretty much act as if we were lying about everything.
They done an eye exam on him. Couldn't find no traces of the blood, so they looked at us and like, okay, well, if it happens again, come back.
Calvino doesn't have to wait long. The next day, the tears of blood return.
The very next day, here we go flying right back up there.
This time they reach the hospital in time for the doctors to witness the phenomenon.
The doctor starts sucking blood out of his eyes, so they was testing it.
The tests reveal nothing.
A couple of weeks went by, and the only thing we got out of it was, you know, he still has 20/20 vision, but it's his blood. We just don't know where it's coming from. Yes, my son's normal, but there's nothing normal about bleeding from the eyes.
Calvino's condition gets worse. He begins crying blood for hours.
The longest one that I can remember, I think, was about 2.5, almost 3 hours.
Calvino's strange affliction also starts to impact his personal life.
There was people, they'd just come up and stare at me. They wouldn't say not one word to me, they'd stare at me and then walk away. People were getting ignorant and they were talking about how they didn't really want me going to their school. People were telling me that I was possessed. They were just saying all kinds of crazy stuff.
He was riding on his moped one day and literally a woman in a SUV ran him off the road.
I missed almost all of school because of all this stuff going. The times that I was there was drama, and I didn't really want to be there. And then the times that I wasn't there was drama, and I still didn't want to be there. It got to the point where I just wanted to be at home and lay in bed all day.
Calvino is so traumatized, he becomes a recluse. And then the condition begins to spread.
When it came out of my mouth, that was a lot of blood. And it wasn't like it was coming out of my tongue or nothing. It's like I was vomiting up blood, pure blood.
Today, doctors still don't have a cause or a cure for Calvino's mysterious bleeding.
Blood comes from my eyes, nose, and my mouth. comes randomly. You never know. Honestly, I have no clue on what happened, what I could have done to make this happen to me.
I still keep the faith that one day that somebody's gonna eventually have an answer for this.
I pray that it'll stop, and I have people who pray for me that it will stop.
Why does an otherwise healthy teen cry tears of blood? Demonologist and professional exorcist Chris Ward thinks the answer is obvious.
I believe that Calvino's tears could be the very first stage of a possession.
Demonic possession, having your soul taken over by an evil spirit, or even the devil himself. It's a truly terrifying prospect. Do these malevolent beings actually exist?
The devil is real. In fact, there are devils, there are demons, there are curses, there are hexes, spells. They're all very real, and they can completely destroy your life.
How do possessions happen?
Demons enter through traumatic experiences. It can also happen through generational curses.
With their spirit weakened by some traumatic event, Ward believes the victim's soul becomes ripe for demonic picking.
Possession to me is like a personality hijacking. That there are disembodied spirits that actually thirst for a body and will want to come in and completely bully out your personality and take over your body. So it's like a hijacking.
Is a demon trying to take over California? Chris Ward also believes there might be another force at work inside him, but it's a little more friendly.
It's a possibility that this is a warning from God. Oftentimes in the Old Testament, whenever God had to correct a nation or correct a people, he often sent a prophet or a warning. I believe it's a good possibility God is using Calvino to give a message to people.
Is a battle between good and evil raging inside Calvino? Chris Ward thinks it's a possibility we must consider.
I believe that God is trying to reach out to us and give us a chance to repent and return to a world where we do have accountability towards our fellow man.
Is Calvino possessed by a demon? Are his tears of blood a warning of impending apocalypse? Or is there something even more bizarre at work?
Calvino's tears of blood could indicate that he's a vampire.
A Tennessee teenager cries tears of blood, seemingly without a cause. Is he possessed by demonic spirits or a messenger from God? American Studies PhD student John Browning is a monster expert. He asks us to consider a different explanation.
In my opinion, Calvino's tears of blood could indicate that he's a vampire. He exhibits a major feature that we see in the modern-day vampire. By crying tears of blood, we see a lot of what's going on in True Blood or what we read in Interview with the Vampire.
Vampires are the stuff of nightmares. Do they really exist?
My ethnographic study is people who live in New Orleans who self-identify as vampire. And what that means is that they consume human blood or animal blood or take what they call psychic energy. Sometimes they do both. A sanguine vampire is someone who consumes blood. A psychic vampire is someone who consumes psychic energy. And a hybrid is someone who does both. And that condition, this desire to take one or the other, is something that they experience very early in life, generally around puberty. And if they don't take one or the other, they feel unnaturally weak. They can eat plenty of food, vitamins, you name it, and they still won't feel particularly normal or healthy until they discover that if they consume one or the other, it helps them and they feel better. For them, it's more or less something that they have to do. If they don't take the blood, then they will begin to feel weak. Some of them have tried to test themselves by not doing it and wound up putting themselves in the hospital.
So are Calvino's tears of blood a sign that he's turning into a creature of the night?
Crying tears of blood harkens back to cases in the 1600s and 1700s in Europe where villagers were exhuming bodies of people who were suspected of being vampires. There would be blood coming from the mouth, eyes, nose of the corpse, which they just assumed was the blood of the victims the vampire had been feeding on. And especially prominent was the blood coming from the eye area.
But Browning cautions us not to go running for our crucifixes and wooden stakes just yet. Tears of blood alone don't make Calvino a vampire.
If Calvino were a vampire, he would need to exude more than just blood from his eyes. There would be other characteristics. For example, you might see some of Calvino's relatives or neighbors complaining at night that they see visions of Calvino, that he visits them in their dreams, that they see him popping up in their bedrooms at night, and they would have to complain of lack of energy, and in some cases, blood.
For Browning, only time will tell if Calvino is becoming a vampire, but he has a stark warning.
If Calvino is becoming a vampire, I don't think he can stop the process.
So this young innocent boy, Calvino's a vampire. I mean, come on. I know vampires are all the rage at the moment, but do they really expect us to believe that these blood-sucking monsters really exist? Just in case.
Are Calvino Inman's bloody tears a sign that he is becoming a vampire? Ophthalmologist Dr. Alan Shlomovic doesn't see the supernatural in Calvino's tears, but he finds them no less amazing.
This is a very rare condition. I think there may be 5 articles in all of the peer-reviewed journals that review this. I've been doing this for 26 years. I think I've seen one other case of hemolacria. Hemolacria just means blood in the tears.
For Dr. Shlomovic, hemolacria is just the beginning of this medical mystery.
Blood showing up from anywhere in the body is usually an ominous sign, although it can be due to many things. It's a symptom, it's not a disease.
But a symptom of what?
There's a spectrum of diseases that will cause hemolacria. There's infection, there's inflammation, there's certain bleeding disorders. There's been another case report in the literature where there was a lady from Zimbabwe who had tuberculosis of her nasal sinuses, and this resulted in hemolacria. I don't think that's what Calvino has, but there are other more worrisome conditions, such as a tumor, which could block the natural flow of the tears out of the eye. The good side of it is I don't think he's losing enough blood that it would affect his overall well-being. So I think that would be something you'd have to check, is his overall hemoglobin, hematocrit, just to make sure that stays within normal limits. And also I'd be concerned about his bleeding through other mucosal membranes.
Although confident there's a scientific explanation for Calvino's condition, Dr. Shlomovic admits it may never be found.
I know that he's had CAT scans and MRIs. It's just one of these unusual circumstances that we cannot explain.
Is Calvino Inman a medical enigma? Are tears of blood a sign of possession by a higher or diabolical power? Or is this proof that vampires exist? Weird. Or what? So, there we have it. 3 stories of medical mysteries. A woman becomes so toxic she sickens dozens of people. Did her body produce nerve gas? Lightning turns a man into a musical prodigy. Can trauma trigger hidden talents? And a young man sheds tears of blood. Is it a sign of impending Armageddon? You decide.
Join me next time for more stories that will undoubtedly be weird, or what?